Hi, I'm Karen Roby here with Danny Palmer of ZDNet. We're talking today about the current state of ransomware attacks here in 2019 and several that we're hearing about, specifically with cities involved, Danny, here in the United States. But it's something we're hearing more and more about, and it's really scary.
Yes, especially as a lot of these cities in recent months have paid out to cyber attackers to get their files and systems restored following a ransomware attack. In this case, there's been cases where it's been up to $600,000 have been paid out in order to restore services to cities. That was the case in Riviera Beach City in Florida, which only has a population of 34,000, but the attackers have made a lot of money by locking down services online. And in some cases, it affected 911 services. Those services were still operating, but with limited capacity. So these attacks had a direct impact on the cities as a whole, which is, I suppose, why the local governments took the decision to give in and pay out the ransom demands. Even though it's a lot of money, I suppose they just decided it was worth the cost rather than having systems down for weeks or maybe even months.
And Danny, before we get into what these cities can do, to keep this from happening, though, let's talk about the particular cities. You said this one in Florida, of course, is very small. So obviously they're targeting these areas where maybe IT departments just aren't very sophisticated, simply because they don't have a very large staff, and they obviously have systems with flaws, and they're opening themselves up to these type of attacks.
It's quite an interesting case. I mean, there's two schools of thought in the matter. There's the idea that cities are being targeted specifically because, as you say, these smaller cities may not have the biggest IT departments in the world. So they could be seen as a simple target because they may not have done things like apply patches or have the most robust defenses in the world. There's also a theory that the attackers are being opportunistic and just looking for exposed servers, exposed internet-facing systems, which they're getting into, which just happen to be those of these cities. I mean, of the ones that have been hit in recent weeks, one of the largest population is 70,000 people, which isn't that big. Compare that with the likes of Baltimore and the likes of Atlanta, which have both been hit with ransomware in quite high-profile ways in recent times. Those two cities opted not to pay. They spent millions on fixing the systems and restoring systems and rebuilding new ones. But these larger cities probably have the resources to afford to be able to do that. Although one has to wonder why they didn't invest in that security before the attack rather than just going ahead and doing it afterwards. But in theory, they're going to be protected in future. And hopefully these smaller cities following that example, because even though they've paid up, which bodies like the FBI don't recommend doing because the money goes into the pockets of criminals. In theory, their systems should be better in future because hopefully they're investing in bolstering their systems now. If they're not, I suppose they'll be seen as a potential easy target and could be forced to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars again.
Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing to say that they wouldn't be hit again. And Danny, is this kind of a younger crime?
Yeah, it's certainly the next stage in the evolution of ransomware, it seems, because ransomware really came emerged a few years ago in the mainstream, at least, of attackers almost holding consumer PCs to hostage. Basically, give us $100 to get your PC back. Then they stepped up and started attacking businesses and asking for a few $1,000s. There's been cases where very large organizations have had their systems held to ransom and have been asked to pay hundreds of thousands or even over $1 million. Some organizations pay, some don't. But it seems that organizations have started to realize that their systems could be quite vulnerable to these attacks, especially with the high-profile cases such as Norsk Hydro in recent times. So in theory, organizations have been bolstering their defenses, leaving these cities as the next sort of selected target, as it were, because in many cases it seems that these cities, even though they command budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars, they might really operate like a small business. There might be, the IT department of one of these small cities might just be a couple of people with limited resources, and if it's a weak spot, that's what cyber criminals can go after. Hopefully, if there is one silver lining from all this, it's that cities will see that this is a problem and act to boost their defenses before they become the next target. It seems that cities in the United States have become a particular target for this, but one of the reasons for this is the case is probably just because the United States is so large. I mean, over there you've got a population of 325 million. There's probably tens of thousands of cities with populations of under 50,000, which could be ripe for the picking for these attackers. So hopefully, though, the budget departments in those cities are going to be waking up to this and going, yes, have some money to fix this, because in the short run, it might seem like a lot of money has to be spent on improving the systems, but in the long run, you're probably better for it because A, you're not going to fall victim to cyber attacks, and B, you're not going to have the embarrassment of paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to cyber criminals. Because not only is that embarrassing, you don't really know where that money's going. One researcher I spoke to for my feature on this pointed out that nobody knows really who is conducting ransomware attacks. It's such an anonymous crime. There was a major type of ransomware last year called SamSam, which it turned out was built and produced by a couple of cyber criminals in Iran. And as far as I'm aware, the United States has sanctions against Iran. So if any organization is found to have paid money to the Iranians in this way, I mean, that could open another kettle of fish, which in terms of, was it lawful in terms of doing that trading? So I guess the base answer here is you want to be in a position where you don't need to pay anyone by investing in your security to making sure this doesn't happen in the first place.
There's the obvious things, though, Danny, that the cities and companies, for that matter, can do. So what is being suggested that they keep in mind, just really beefing up their security on the front end?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things an organization can do is obviously make sure they're running some sort of cybersecurity software, because that might help keep out a lot of bad things as a last defense. Then there's other things which can help make things simpler. I mean, making sure your operating systems and software is all patched and up to date. In many cases, malware attacks are using Microsoft Word exploits, which are sometimes years old. So if your Microsoft Word systems haven't been updated in 3 years, you should probably apply that patch. I mean, we saw we saw the damage which could be done by patches being issued but not being installed when WannaCry happened, because the patch Microsoft issued for that in April of 2017, or even maybe late March, still hadn't been patched in May in some cases, which lent itself to this attack being so devastating because all these systems hadn't applied the updates required. There's also it's a good idea to make sure that if systems don't need to be facing the internet, then don't have them facing the internet, because in a lot of these cases, cyber criminals just happen to stumble across things like servers which have been misconfigured and left open to the public internet, so it can be accessed from the outside, and that's just an open door for attackers. So if that stuff isn't online, if it isn't facing the public internet, and if it's patched, they're two simple things, but they can go a long way to stopping this type of attack. And those two things, in theory, shouldn't cost you a lot of money. Falling victim to a ransomware attack and having to pay the cyber criminals and then rebuild your systems afterwards is going to cost a heck of a lot more in the long run.
Yeah, indeed. So you got to stay vigilant and just to try to stay one step ahead of the criminals. Danny, we thank you for that. And Danny's full article and feature on ransomware can be found on ZDNet.